February 14, 1943. Haarlem, Netherlands. 23 minutes past midnight. Cornelia ten Boom stood at the window of her bedroom on the third floor of the beach, watching shadows move through the Bartellegeristraat below. The shadows wore German uniforms. They were searching houses 3 doors down. Methodically. Professionally. The kind of search that found everything. In the room behind her, 4 people breathed as quietly as possible. A Jewish mother and her 2 children. An Amsterdam University student wanted for refusing labor conscription. They had arrived 6 hours earlier through the network. The underground railroad that moved hunted people through occupied Holland like water through cracks in stone. The beach had been hiding people for 18 months. 56 refugees had passed through this house. Temporary shelter before moving to safer locations in the countryside. False papers. New identities. New lives. But tonight, 4 people remained. And the Germans were coming. Corrie, as her friends called her, was 50 years old. A watchmaker like her father. Unmarried. Unremarkable. The kind of person German soldiers passed on the street without a second glance. That ordinariness had been her greatest asset for the past year and a half. No one suspected the spinster watchmaker of harboring enemies of the Reich. But the shadows below suggested that ordinariness might not be enough anymore. The house searches in Haarlem had increased dramatically in January. The Gestapo and security police had established a new headquarters on Smeddestraat, 4 blocks away. They were hunting resistance members. They were hunting Jews. They were hunting anyone who helped them. The methodology was simple and brutal. Search every building. Question every resident. Check every identification card. Arrest anyone suspicious. In the first week of February alone, 63 people had been arrested in Haarlem. 42 Jews. 17 resistance workers. 4 random citizens whose papers looked wrong. The cells at the police station on Smeddestraat were full. Deportation trains to the East left Westerbork camp 3 times per week. Each train carried 1,000 people. Almost none returned. The underground network in Haarlem knew the mathematics of survival. Every day in hiding was a victory. Every person successfully moved to safety was a miracle. But every additional search increased the probability of discovery. The Germans were learning. Adapting. Getting better at finding what people tried to hide. Standard hiding places no longer worked. Attics were checked first. Basements were obvious. False walls needed depth that most Dutch houses did not have. The tall, narrow buildings characteristic of Haarlem offered limited architectural options for concealment. Room dimensions were standard. Wall thicknesses were predictable. Floor plans were similar across entire neighborhoods. German search teams carried measuring tapes. They calculated interior dimensions and compared them to exterior measurements. Discrepancies meant hidden spaces. Hidden spaces meant people. People meant arrests. The resistance had tried various solutions. Some families built hiding places in chimneys. But chimneys were checked. Others created spaces beneath floorboards. But floors were examined. A few constructed elaborate hiding places in furniture. But furniture could be moved, inspected, destroyed. The fundamental problem was architectural. Dutch houses were not designed for concealment. They were designed for light and space. Large windows. High ceilings. Open floor plans. Beautiful for living. Terrible for hiding. Corrie watched the shadows finish searching the house 3 doors down. No arrests. The family emerged onto the street, looking shaken but unharmed. The search team moved to the next building. 2 houses away now. Behind her, one of the children whispered to his mother. The mother placed a hand over his mouth. Gentle but firm. Silence was survival. Even a whisper at the wrong moment could kill them all. The beach had no hiding place yet. 56 refugees had stayed temporarily, then moved on before searches came. But these 4 could not move. The mother was sick. Fever. Possibly influenza. Moving her in winter would kill her as surely as capture. The resistance network had asked Corrie to keep them until the mother recovered. 2 weeks, perhaps 3. The timing was catastrophic. The Germans had never searched this block before. Now they were searching every building. House by house. Floor by floor. Room by room. Corrie's father, Casper ten Boom, had suggested surrender. Turn the refugees over to the authorities. Claim ignorance. Say they had been forced to shelter them. It was a lie that might be believed. The alternative was certain arrest for the entire family. Casper was 84 years old. He would not survive interrogation, much less deportation. Corrie had refused. The moment you surrendered one person, you surrendered them all. The moment you valued your own life over the lives of the hunted, you became complicit in the hunting. This was not philosophy. This was mathematics. The shadows moved to the house next door. One house away. In 18 months, the beach had developed no permanent hiding solution because no permanent hiding had been necessary. People came, stayed briefly, departed. Like water. Always flowing. Never static. But now 4 people needed to become invisible for weeks. And invisibility required architecture. Corrie had contacted an architect 3 days earlier. A man in the network known only as the architect. His real name was unknown to most resistance members. Security protocol. The less people knew about each other, the less they could reveal under torture. The architect had visited the beach yesterday. He spent 4 hours measuring rooms. Studying walls. Testing floor joists. Examining the house's structure from foundation to attic. He said nothing during the inspection. Just measured and made notes in a small leather-bound book. Before leaving, he had given Corrie a single instruction. Keep them alive for 3 more days. I'll return Thursday with workers. Today was Sunday. Thursday was an eternity away. The shadows reached the house next door. Corrie heard voices. German voices. Commands. Authoritative. The tone men use when they expect to be obeyed without question. She heard the neighbor's door open. Heard boots on wooden floors. Heard furniture being moved. The search of the adjacent house took 27 minutes. Corrie counted. Every minute felt like an hour. Behind her, the 4 refugees sat motionless. The children understood. When you are prey, stillness is life. Movement is death. At 1:08, the Germans finished searching next door. No arrests. The search team emerged and stood on the street, consulting maps. Checking addresses against lists. One soldier pointed at the beach. Another nodded. They began walking toward the entrance. Corrie turned from the window. Looked at the 4 people in her room. A mother with fever-bright eyes holding her children close. A student barely 20 years old trying not to shake. They looked at her with the expression that hunted people wear when the hunters arrive. Hope mixed with resignation. The knowledge that survival depends entirely on luck and the courage of strangers. The heavy knock came on the front door. 3 deliberate strikes. The sound of authority. Corrie's sister Betsy appeared in the doorway. Betsy was 58. Frail. The kind of frailty that came from a lifetime of illness. She looked at Corrie with a question in her eyes. What do we do? Corrie made a decision. Not a plan. Not a strategy. Just a desperate, immediate choice. Move the armoire in front of the wall, she whispered to the student. Everyone behind it. Stay absolutely silent. It was not a hiding place. It was barely concealment. The armoire was heavy oak, floor to ceiling, but it only extended 18 inches from the wall. Anyone standing behind it would be visible from the sides. It would fool no one who actually looked. But it was all they had. The student helped move the furniture. The mother and children positioned themselves in the narrow space. Corrie pushed the armoire back against the wall. Not flush. Gaps remained. But in dim light, from certain angles, it might appear unremarkable. The knocking came again. Louder. More insistent. Corrie descended the narrow stairs to the ground floor. Her father was already there, opening the door. Casper ten Boom smiled at the German officers. The smile was genuine. Casper believed that all people, even soldiers of an occupying army, deserved basic courtesy. It was a belief that would eventually kill him. But tonight, it might save them all. "Good evening, gentlemen," Casper said in German. His German was flawless. Years of watchmaking trade with German clients before the war. "How may we help you?" The lead officer was SS. The skull insignia on his collar confirmed it. He held a clipboard with a typed list of addresses. "This residence will be searched. Standard security procedure. All occupants will remain visible during the search." Corrie counted the search team. 4 men. 2 SS. 2 Ordnungspolizei. Regular police. The SS men would be thorough. The police would be less so. That distinction might matter. "Of course," Casper said. "Please come in. Would you care for tea?" The SS officer looked at Casper with an expression that might have been surprise or contempt. Dutch hospitality offered to German occupiers. "No tea. Show us each room." The search began on the ground floor. The watch shop. Worktables covered with timepieces in various states of repair. Tools. Springs. Gears. The officers examined everything. Opened drawers. Checked beneath tables. Found nothing unusual. The first floor contained the living quarters. Kitchen. Sitting room. Casper's bedroom. The search was methodical. Efficient. One officer measured the sitting room with a metal tape measure. Compared the interior dimension to the exterior wall thickness. The numbers matched. The second floor held Betsy's room and a storage area. More measuring. More checking. The officer with the tape measure seemed disappointed that his measurements revealed nothing suspicious. Then they climbed to the third floor. Corrie's bedroom. The room was small. Perhaps 12 feet by 14. A bed. A dresser. A small desk. And the armoire against the far wall. In the dim light from a single lamp, the armoire looked like furniture. Nothing more. The SS officer entered first. He walked the perimeter of the room. Checked the window. Examined the ceiling. Knocked on walls listening for hollow sounds. Everything was solid. Original construction. Then he approached the armoire. Corrie's heart stopped. The officer placed his hand on the armoire's carved oak door. Tested the handle. Behind that door, behind the hanging clothes, behind the few inches of space between the wardrobe's back and the wall, 4 people were holding their breath. The officer pulled the door open. Looked inside. Saw dresses. Coats. The ordinary contents of an ordinary wardrobe belonging to an ordinary unmarried woman. He closed the door. Turned away. Walked to the doorway. "This floor is clear," he said to his subordinates. The search team descended the stairs. Spent 3 more minutes checking the hallway and examining identification papers. Found everything in order. Casper ten Boom. Watchmaker. Betsy ten Boom. Housekeeper. Cornelia ten Boom. Watchmaker's apprentice. All papers correct. All identifications valid. At 1:47, the Germans left. The door closed behind them. Corrie listened to their boots on the cobblestones. Heard them move to the next building on the block. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Moved the armoire. The 4 refugees emerged. The mother was crying silently. Relief mixed with terror. They had survived, but survival was not safety. The Germans would return. Search teams always returned. The student looked at Corrie with a question. "How did they not see us? We were right there." Corrie had no answer. Pure luck. Divine intervention. The particular angle of lamplight. The officer's assumption that if identification papers were in order, nothing else would be hidden. Some combination of factors that created survival from impossibility. But she knew this luck would not repeat. The next search would be more thorough. The next officers might be more perceptive. The next time, 4 people hiding behind an armoire would be 4 people arrested, interrogated, and deported. The architect needed to arrive Thursday. Thursday needed to arrive before the next search. 3 days. That was all the time they had to transform an ordinary Dutch house into something that could make human beings invisible. Thursday, February 18, 1943. 9:15 hours. The architect arrived with two men. Both carried toolboxes. Both wore the rough clothing of construction workers. Nothing about their appearance suggested they were about to commit a crime that carried a mandatory death sentence under German occupation law. The crime was this: altering a building to create a hiding place for Jews. The architect climbed immediately to the third floor. Corrie followed. Betsy remained downstairs watching for police patrols. The four refugees had been moved to a safe house in Overveen the previous night. Too dangerous to keep them at the beach until the hiding place was complete. In Corrie's bedroom, the architect removed a measuring tape from his toolbox and began checking dimensions with the precision of a man whose calculations could not afford errors. He measured the room's width. Measured the distance from the exterior wall to the armoire. Measured the thickness of the brick wall separating Corrie's room from the adjacent building. The adjacent building was a commercial property. A fabric shop. It had been vacant since November when the owner, a Jewish merchant named Klein-Jan, had been arrested and deported to Westerbork. The building was now owned by the German occupation authorities. Technically, that made the wall separating the beach from Klein-Jan's shop a wall between private Dutch property and Reich property. The architect studied this wall with particular intensity. The wall is brick, he said. Original construction, probably 1837. Double thickness. Approximately 16 inches total depth. He turned to Corrie. Do you know the floor plan of Klein-Jan's building? I've been inside a few times, Corrie said. Why? Because I'm going to steal 18 inches of that building. The concept was elegant in its impossibility. The wall separating Corrie's room from the vacant shop was 16 inches thick. The architect planned to remove the interior brickwork on the beach side of that wall, creating a cavity. Then he would construct a false wall on the beach side, positioned 18 inches in front of the real wall. The space between the false wall and the real wall would become the hiding place. But the mathematics created a problem. 18 inches was the minimum depth needed for adult humans to stand comfortably without touching both walls. However, creating that space would reduce Corrie's bedroom by 18 inches in width. The room would shrink from 12 feet to 10.5 feet. Any competent search team would notice the discrepancy. They would measure the exterior walls. Measure the interior dimensions. Calculate that 18 inches had disappeared. Disappeared space meant hidden space. Hidden space meant arrests. The architect's solution was architectural theater. He would not hide the false wall. He would make it the most obvious, most visible, most examined feature of the entire room. Bookcases, he said. Floor to ceiling. Oak construction. They'll run the entire length of the wall. When someone enters this room, that's what they'll see first. Books. Hundreds of books. The mind recognizes the purpose immediately. This is where the spinster watchmaker keeps her library. Of course the wall has shelves. What else would it have? Corrie understood the psychology. People see what they expect to see. A wall of bookshelves in a bedroom was unusual but not suspicious. Unusual things drew attention. Attention led to examination. Examination revealed that the bookshelves were exactly what they appeared to be. Real wood. Real books. Real shelves. Once the mind confirmed that the unusual thing was exactly what it seemed, the mind stopped looking. The trap was in the confirmation. Search teams would examine the bookshelves. Would measure the thickness of the wood. Would calculate that yes, the shelves explained why the room appeared smaller than expected. The bookshelves were real. Therefore, there was no deception. The mind, having confirmed the reality of the unusual thing, would not search for something behind it. How long will construction take? Corrie asked. 6 days if we're lucky. 8 if we're not. The challenge is removing the original brickwork silently. Hammer and chisel make noise. Neighbors hear noise. Neighbors report unusual construction activity. Germans investigate. The architect explained the method. The two workers would remove bricks one at a time using hand-operated tools. Slow. Methodical. Quiet. Each brick would be carried down to the basement and hidden beneath coal. The cavity would be created gradually, expanding deeper into the wall with each brick removed. The false wall would be constructed from new wood framed against existing studs. It would be load-bearing capable, strong enough to support floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The wood would be planed and finished to match the room's original construction. To a search team, it would appear to be original architecture from 1837, not recent modification. The entrance to the hiding place required the most careful consideration. A door would be obvious. A movable panel would be detectable. The architect's solution was a sliding section of bookshelf so precisely balanced that it could be moved with one hand. The movement mechanism used a weighted pivot system. Push in the correct sequence, and a 3-foot-wide section of bookshelf would slide aside on hidden tracks. Release, and it would close automatically under its own weight. Where will the pivot mechanism be located? Corrie asked. The architect pointed to a specific shelf at shoulder height. Here. 5 books in from the left edge. Push this entire shelf inward approximately 2 inches. It will release the locking mechanism. The entire section will shift. He demonstrated the motion. Push. Wait. Slide. The movement needed to feel natural. Needed to appear accidental if someone discovered it. Just a poorly constructed shelf that moved when pressed. Nothing more. The hiding place itself would be approximately 18 inches deep, 8 feet wide, 7 feet tall. Enough space for 6 adults to stand. No sitting. Standing only. But standing was survival. The architect addressed the ventilation problem. 6 people standing in an enclosed space would consume oxygen rapidly. Carbon dioxide would accumulate. Within an hour, people would begin experiencing headaches. Within 3 hours, they would lose consciousness. His solution was to drill a ventilation shaft through the original brick wall into Kleingen's vacant building. The shaft would be 2 inches in diameter, hidden behind the bookshelves. Air would circulate through the shaft from the empty shop into the hiding place. Passive airflow. No mechanical systems. No sounds. Just physics. What about light? Corrie asked. No light. Darkness only. Light requires electricity. Electrical wiring can be detected. Heat from bulbs can be measured by sensitive equipment. The hiding place must be completely cold and completely dark. People inside will have no visual reference. They will exist in absolute blackness for however long the search continues. The psychological implications were severe. Humans panic in complete darkness. Especially children. Panic made noise. Noise meant discovery. Discovery meant death. The architect had a partial solution. Before hiding, each person would be given a small piece of cloth soaked in lavender oil. The scent would provide a psychological anchor. Something familiar in the darkness. Something real. Studies had shown that familiar scents reduced panic responses. Lavender specifically had calming properties. It was not much, but it might be enough to keep people silent in the blackness. The construction began that afternoon. The 2 workers started on the original brick wall using specialized tools. Diamond-tipped chisels. Rubber-handled hammers wrapped in cloth. Each strike on brick was nearly silent. Just a dull tap. Like someone dropping a book. Over 6 days, they removed 734 bricks. Each brick was carried downstairs in a cloth bag and hidden in the coal cellar. The coal absorbed the brick dust. Made the removal invisible. As the cavity expanded, the workers built the false wall. New lumber arrived in small quantities, delivered by different people at different times. No large shipments. No unusual activity. Just ordinary construction materials for ordinary home repairs. The wood was planed to precise dimensions. Fitted perfectly against existing studs. Sealed with wallpaper that matched the room's current covering. The bookshelves were constructed on-site using quarter-sawn oak. Heavy. Solid. They appeared to be original Victorian furniture. The architect had studied photographs of period construction. Matched the style exactly. Even an expert in 19th-century architecture would struggle to identify the bookshelves as recent fabrication. On the 6th day, the workers installed the sliding mechanism. It was mechanical genius. A weighted counterbalance system using pulleys and cables hidden inside the bookshelf frame. When the trigger shelf was pushed, the counterbalance released. Gravity pulled the section aside using the person's own push for momentum. When released, the counterbalance reversed. The section closed itself. Silent. Automatic. Perfect. They tested it repeatedly. Corrie practiced the movement. Push at this exact point. Use approximately 4 pounds of pressure. The shelf clicks inward 2 inches. Wait 3 seconds for the counterbalance to release. The section slides aside. Step through. Release the trigger shelf. The section closes automatically. The entire motion took 7 seconds. 7 seconds to vanish. On February 24, the construction was complete. The architect performed a final inspection. Measured every dimension. Checked every joint. Tested the sliding mechanism 15 times. Verified that the ventilation shaft provided adequate airflow. Stood in a hiding place himself to confirm that 6 adults could fit comfortably standing. Everything worked. The hiding place existed. A space that did not exist according to architectural drawings. A space that German measuring tapes would not detect because the bookshelves explained the missing inches. A space where the hunted could stand in darkness and silence while hunters searched the room inches away. But creating the space was only half the solution. The harder problem was making people understand how to use it. The architect explained the critical reality. This hiding place will only work if everyone follows 3 absolute rules. First, complete silence. Not a whisper. Not a breath. Nothing. Second, absolute stillness. Don't shift weight. Don't scratch. Don't move. Third, trust the darkness. Your eyes will try to find light. There is no light. Accept this. If you panic, everyone dies. Corrie asked the question that mattered. How long can people survive in there? Physically. Days. The ventilation provides oxygen. The space is large enough for 6 adults. But psychologically? The architect paused. Most people break after 2 hours in complete darkness. Children break faster. If someone breaks, if someone makes noise, the hiding place fails. Everyone is discovered. This isn't a safe haven. This is a gamble that people can control their own fear long enough to outlast a search. The mathematics were brutal but clear. A typical house search lasted 45 minutes. Thorough searches took 90 minutes. The longest recorded search in Haarlem had been 3 hours and 16 minutes. If people could remain silent and motionless for 3.5 hours in complete darkness, they would survive. If they couldn't, they would die. Not just the people in the hiding place. Everyone in the house. The entire family. The entire network. It was not a question of architecture. It was a question of human psychology. And human psychology was unpredictable. The architect left the same evening. Before departing, he gave Corrie a final instruction. Practice. Put people in the hiding place regularly. Make them stand there in the darkness. Start with 30 minutes. Build to longer durations. Let them learn what the darkness feels like before it's necessary. Because when it's necessary, there won't be time to learn. Corrie asked if there would be additional modifications. Improvements. Refinements. The architect shook his head. This is as good as it gets. The hiding place is architecturally sound. It will fool measuring tapes. It will fool visual inspection. But it won't fool dogs, it won't fool thermal sensors if the Germans develop them, and it won't fool betrayal. If someone informs, if someone tells the Germans exactly where to look, no architecture can save you. He handed Corrie a small card. On it was written a single number, 274. This is how many Jewish people are currently hiding in Haarlem, he said. I've built hiding places for 37 of them. None have been discovered yet. But statistically, at least 3 will be found within the next 6 months. Maybe more. The Germans are learning. Getting better. Every day this war continues, survival becomes harder. Remember that. The hiding place is a tool, not a guarantee. February 25, 1943. The beach had a hiding place. Now they needed to test whether human beings could actually use it. March 3, 1943. 1400 hours. The first test began with 6 volunteers from the resistance network. 3 men, 3 women. All Jewish. All currently hiding in Haarlem safe houses. All volunteers to help Corrie understand whether the hiding place actually worked. Corrie showed them the entrance mechanism. Demonstrated the push, the weight, the slide. Each person practiced the motion 5 times until it became automatic. Muscle memory. In an emergency, there would be no time for instruction. Either they knew how to enter, or they died in the room while the hiding place remained empty. At 14:15, all 6 entered the hiding place. The bookshelf section closed automatically. From the bedroom, nothing appeared unusual. Just a wall of books. An ordinary room. Corrie left them in complete darkness. Closed the bedroom door. Descended to the first floor and waited. The rule was simple. Remain silent and motionless for 1 hour. After that hour, Corrie would return and release them. 1 hour was less than most searches lasted. If people couldn't manage 1 hour, they couldn't manage a real emergency. At 14:47, Corrie heard a sound from the 3rd floor. Muffled. Barely audible. But definitely a sound. She climbed the stairs and entered her bedroom. The bookshelf wall appeared unchanged. But behind it, someone had made noise. She activated the release mechanism. The section slid aside. All 6 people were standing exactly where she had left them. But one woman, Sarah Goudsmit, was trembling. Tears streaked her face. "I can't do it," Sarah whispered. "The darkness. I see things in it. Shapes. Faces. I know they're not real, but I see them anyway." Corrie understood. The human brain fills darkness with hallucinations when deprived of visual input. It's evolutionary biology. The brain expects vision. When no light arrives, the brain creates images from memory, fear, and expectation. Most people experience these hallucinations within 45 minutes of complete darkness. Sarah had lasted 32 minutes. Longer than many, but not long enough. The other 5 volunteers remained standing. Silent. Motionless. Corrie asked if anyone else needed to leave. No response. They had maintained discipline even when Sarah made noise. That discipline was critical. Corrie closed the hiding place. Left Sarah in the bedroom to recover. Returned downstairs and waited. At 15:15, exactly 1 hour after the test began, Corrie returned. Released the mechanism. All 5 remaining volunteers emerged. Physically fine. Psychologically strained. The darkness had been harder than expected. All reported visual hallucinations. 3 reported feeling disoriented about up and down. One man, Jacob Rabinovich, said he had nearly panicked when he couldn't remember which direction was forward. "Everything disappears," Jacob said. "Not just light. Your sense of space disappears. You know you're standing upright, but your body starts to question it. You start thinking maybe you're tilted. Maybe the floor isn't level. It's terrifying." Corrie documented everything. Hallucination onset, 30 to 45 minutes. Spatial disorientation, 40 to 50 minutes. Panic threshold, unknown. Sarah had panicked, but others had not. The variable was psychological resilience, which differed by individual. She conducted 3 more tests over the following week. Each test revealed new problems and new solutions. Problem: people shifted weight unconsciously, creating slight sounds. Solution: practice standing completely still for extended periods before hiding. Problem: breathing became synchronized when multiple people stood close together in darkness. Synchronized breathing was louder than individual breathing. Solution: each person was taught to breathe on different rhythms. Count to 3, inhale. Count to 4, exhale. Stagger the count so no 2 people breathed simultaneously. Problem: people experienced severe thirst after 90 minutes but couldn't drink because swallowing made noise. Solution: teach people to sip water before hiding. Hydrate in advance. Problem: Children couldn't understand why they needed to stand absolutely still in darkness. The concept was too abstract. Solution: frame it as a game. We're playing statues. Whoever moves first loses. The prize is staying with mommy. The most surprising problem emerged during the fourth test. One volunteer, a young woman named Rachel Levenstein, remained perfectly silent and motionless for the entire 2-hour test. When released, she explained her method. "I went somewhere else," Rachel said. "In my mind. I imagined I was in my grandmother's kitchen before the war. I could see every detail. The tiles on the floor. The copper pots on the wall. The smell of bread baking. I stood there in that kitchen for 2 hours. The darkness didn't matter because I wasn't in the darkness. I was somewhere else." Mental displacement. The psychological technique of creating an internal environment to replace the external one. It was a survival mechanism that some people developed naturally. Corrie added it to the training protocol. Before hiding, spend 5 minutes visualizing a safe, familiar place. When the darkness comes, go to that place in your mind. By March 12, the training had created a core group of 17 people who could successfully use the hiding place. 17 individuals who understood the darkness, who had practiced the stillness, who knew the entrance mechanism, who had learned to control their breath and their fear. 17 people who might survive what was coming. Because what was coming was inevitable. The Germans were intensifying searches across Haarlem. Raid frequency had tripled in the first week of March. The Gestapo was systematically working through every building in the city center. They were using more sophisticated equipment. More thorough methods. More experienced searchers. A raid on the beach was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. The only questions were when and how many people would be hiding. March 28, 1943. 1:30 hours. The alarm system activated. A buzzer wired to doorbells throughout the house. The signal meant one thing: raid imminent. Run to the hiding place. Now. Corrie had 4 people in residence that night. A Jewish couple from Amsterdam, a resistance worker from Rotterdam, and a 15-year-old Jewish girl named Hannah who had been separated from her parents in a previous raid. 4 people. 1 minute to reach the hiding place. 7 seconds to enter and close the mechanism. That left 53 seconds for travel time up 2 flights of stairs. The practice drills had averaged 42 seconds from alarm to complete concealment. 11 seconds of margin. Not much. But enough if nothing went wrong. Everything went wrong. Hannah panicked. Instead of climbing to the 3rd floor, she ran to the basement. The survival instinct to hide in the deepest, darkest place overrode her training. The resistance worker, Peter van Dyke, ran after her. Precious seconds disappeared. The Amsterdam couple, the Goldsteins, reached the 3rd floor. Entered Corrie's room. Activated the hiding place mechanism. Entered. The bookshelf closed automatically. 27 seconds had elapsed. Peter was still in the basement trying to convince Hannah to climb to the 3rd floor. Corrie could hear German voices outside. Commands. The sound of rifle butts on doors. Peter finally carried Hannah up the stairs. They reached the 3rd floor at 58 seconds. Too late. German soldiers were already inside the house on the ground floor. Corrie could hear them searching. Coming upstairs. Peter and Hannah entered the hiding place. The mechanism began to close. Then Hannah's coat caught on the bookshelf track. The section stopped halfway. Jammed. German boots on the 2nd floor landing. Coming higher. Peter yanked Hannah's coat free. The mechanism released. The bookshelf slid shut. 71 seconds total. Too slow. Corrie arranged herself in bed. Made the room appear natural. Normal. A spinster watchmaker sleeping through the night. The bedroom door opened. 2 German soldiers entered. One held a flashlight. The other held a rifle. The soldier with the flashlight swept the beam across the room. Bed. Dresser. Desk. Bookshelf wall. The beam lingered on the books. Hundreds of volumes. Floor to ceiling. Large collection, the soldier observed. My father taught me to read, Corrie replied. Her voice was steady. Calm. The voice of someone awakened from sleep but unconcerned. I've been collecting books since childhood. The soldier approached the bookshelves. Examined the spines. Technical manuals. Theological texts. Dutch literature. German philosophy. The collection appeared genuine because it was genuine. Real books accumulated over decades. He knocked on the bookshelf. Wood. Solid. The sound confirmed what his eyes saw. These were bookshelves. Nothing more. Behind the bookshelf, 4 people stood in absolute darkness. Absolutely silent. Absolutely still. 22 inches away from a German soldier's rifle. The soldier knocked on 3 more sections of bookshelf. Each knock sounded the same. Solid wood. No hollow spaces. No hidden chambers. Just books and the oak construction that held them. He turned away. Examined the rest of the room. Found nothing suspicious. Looked at Corrie one final time. She appeared exactly as she should. An unmarried older woman. A watchmaker's daughter. Unremarkable. Papers, the soldier demanded. Corrie produced her identification card from the nightstand. The soldier examined it with a flashlight. Cornelia ten Boom. Born April 15, 1892. Occupation, watchmaker. The information matched. The photograph matched. Everything was in order. The soldier returned the card. Left the room. His partner followed. They moved to the attic. Searched there for 8 minutes. Found nothing. Descended to the ground floor. Continued the search. The entire raid lasted 43 minutes. The Germans searched every floor, every room, every closet. They measured interior dimensions against exterior walls. They knocked on floors listening for hollow spaces. They examined paperwork and identification. They found nothing wrong because nothing appeared wrong. Papers were correct. Dimensions matched. Spaces appeared normal. At 2:13, the Germans departed. The beach was cleared of suspicion. For now. Corrie waited 15 minutes after the Germans left. Security protocol. Sometimes search teams pretended to leave, then returned hoping to catch residents retrieving hidden contraband. After 15 minutes of silence, Corrie activated the bookshelf mechanism. The section slid aside. 4 people emerged. The Goldsteins looked shaken but controlled. Peter appeared exhausted. Hannah was trembling. 71 seconds, Corrie said quietly. Too slow. If they had searched this room first instead of starting on the ground floor, we would all be arrested now. The mathematics were clear. The hiding place worked. But only if people reached it fast enough. Only if the mechanism operated perfectly. Only if everyone remained silent in the darkness. Only if the Germans searched in a sequence that provided enough time. Too many variables. Too many points of failure. But it was all they had. Over the following months, the alarm would sound 43 times. 43 raids. 43 moments when people had 60 seconds to vanish. The success rate was imperfect but sufficient. 38 times, everyone made it to the hiding place before Germans entered the bedroom. 5 times, people failed to reach the hiding place in time and hid elsewhere in the house. 3 of those 5 times, people were discovered and arrested. But the hiding place itself was never found. Not in March. Not in April. Not in May or June or July. German soldiers searched Corrie's bedroom 17 times. They knocked on the bookshelves. Measured the walls. Checked the dimensions. Found everything in order. The bookshelves explained the narrow room. The books were real. The wood was solid. There was nothing to find. Behind the books, people stood in darkness and learned what it meant to be invisible. Learned that silence was survival. Learned that the mind creates monsters in the blackness, but those monsters cannot hurt you if you refuse to scream. And they learned the terrible arithmetic of resistance. Success measured not in victories but in people still breathing. Still free. Still hidden. One more day. One more search survived. One more German soldier walking past everything. August 15, 1943. 9 o'clock hours. 6 months after the hiding place became operational, the Gestapo changed their search methodology. The change was documented in an internal German security memo that the resistance obtained through a sympathetic clerk in the Haarlem occupation headquarters. The memo was clinical. Precise. It identified specific problems in current search procedures and proposed solutions based on statistical analysis of successful resistance arrests versus failed searches. Problem identified: hidden spaces in Dutch houses were becoming increasingly difficult to detect using conventional measurement techniques. Walls had been modified to incorporate concealment chambers. Floor joists had been altered to create subfloor hiding places. Attics had been partitioned into visible and invisible sections. The memo noted that traditional German search methodology relied on architectural analysis. Measure exterior dimensions. Measure interior dimensions. Calculate discrepancies. Investigate discrepancies. This approach had been effective in 1940 and 1941. It was becoming less effective in 1943. The reason was psychological adaptation. Resistance builders had learned to account for measurement discrepancies. They created visible architectural features that explained missing space. Chimney expansions. Enlarged closets. Built-in furniture. Visible modifications that made the hidden space appear to be explained space. The Gestapo memo proposed a new search doctrine based on human psychology rather than architectural mathematics. The doctrine was called Erwartungsprüfung, expectation testing. Instead of measuring spaces, searchers would analyze whether rooms felt psychologically complete. A room should feel finished. Comfortable. Lived in. If a room felt awkward, cramped, or unusually configured, that feeling indicated architectural modification. The human brain processed spatial relationships instinctively. Searchers should trust their instincts more than their measuring tapes. The memo specifically identified bookshelves as a common hiding place explanation mechanism. Quote, bookshelves are frequently used to justify narrowed room dimensions. Search teams should examine bookshelf walls with particular suspicion. Remove books. Test for false panels. Examine the rear wall of shelving units. When Corrie read this memo in late August, she understood the hiding place's vulnerability had increased substantially. The new search doctrine specifically targeted the exact deception that protected the beach. She consulted with the architect. He was frank about the situation. The Germans are learning, he said. They're adapting faster than I expected. The bookshelf technique has maybe 3 more months of effectiveness. Maybe 6 if we're lucky. After that, search teams will automatically check behind every bookshelf in every house. The psychological advantage will be gone. Corrie asked the essential question. How do we adapt? The architect had been considering this problem. His solution was psychological rather than architectural. You make the hiding place less hidden, he said. Currently, the bookshelf appears suspicious because it's unusual. A wall of books in a bedroom is memorable. Memorable things get examined closely. Instead, make the bookshelves unmemorable. Make them so obviously normal that minds skip past them without thought. The modification was subtle but significant. The architect added irregularity to the bookshelf. Previously, the shelves had been perfectly level, perfectly spaced, perfectly constructed. Perfection drew attention. Imperfection was invisible. He deliberately misaligned 3 shelves. Made them slightly crooked. Added visible wear marks to the wood. Created the appearance of decades-old furniture that had settled and warped over time. The kind of bookshelf that every Dutch house contained. Unremarkable. Forgettable. More importantly, he changed the book arrangement. Previously, books had been organized by size and subject. Orderly. That order suggested recent arrangement. Recent arrangement suggested something might be hidden behind the books. The architect scrambled the organization. Mixed sizes. Created visual chaos. Added books that were damaged, worn, obviously old. Added books in multiple languages including German. Dutch houses frequently contained German books before the war. Trade. Cultural exchange. Finding German philosophy texts on a Dutch shelf was completely normal. The psychology was subtle. An organized bookshelf suggested someone cared about those books. Someone who cared might rearrange books to hide something. A disorganized bookshelf suggested the books had accumulated naturally over time. Natural accumulation was invisible. The final modification was the most psychologically sophisticated. The architect added deliberate dust. Dust was evidence of neglect. Neglect indicated that nobody had touched these shelves recently. If nobody had touched them, nothing could be hidden behind them. He applied a carefully controlled layer of authentic dust, collected from actual attics and mixed with natural fibers to match household dust composition, to the tops of books and the fronts of shelves. Not too much dust. Too much suggested abandonment, which was suspicious in an occupied home. Just enough to indicate that yes, someone occasionally pulled a book from this shelf, but mostly these books sat untouched. Like books in every house. Forgotten. Ordinary. The modifications took 2 days to complete. When finished, the bookshelf looked completely unremarkable. The kind of furniture that had existed in that room for decades. The kind of thing a person's eyes would slide past without conscious notice. The test came on September 3, 1943. A surprise search by SD, Sicherheitsdienst, the SS intelligence service. SD searches were more thorough than regular police searches. SD officers were trained in psychological analysis. They were specifically instructed to look for the kinds of modifications that the Gestapo memo had described. The SD team arrived at 11:30 hours. 3 officers. They spent 7 minutes examining the ground floor, 12 minutes on the first floor. At 11:49, they reached Corrie's bedroom. 2 people were hiding behind the bookshelf. A Jewish family had been scheduled to arrive that day, but only the parents had come. The children were being moved through a different route. 2 people standing in absolute darkness. Absolutely silent. Waiting. The lead South Dakota officer was Obersturmführer Karl Bauer. His file, obtained later through resistance intelligence, indicated he had discovered 17 hidden Jews in the previous 3 months. He was considered highly effective. Perceptive. Dangerous. Bauer entered Corrie's bedroom and immediately focused on the bookshelf wall. He had read the Gestapo memo. He knew bookshelves were suspect. He approached slowly. Examining. The shelves appeared old. Weathered. Several were slightly crooked. The books were disorganized. Multiple languages. Some damaged. A thin layer of dust covered the tops of volumes on the higher shelves. Bauer reached out and pulled a book from a middle shelf. Examined it. Put it back. Pulled another. Examined. Replaced. He was checking whether the books were real or just spines glued to a false front. They were real. Every book was genuine. He knocked on the bookshelf. Solid wood. The sound confirmed visual inspection. This was authentic furniture. Not recent construction. Behind the bookshelf, 22 inches away, 2 people held their breath. They could hear the knocking. Could hear Bauer moving books. Could hear everything. But they remained absolutely silent. Absolutely still. They had practiced this moment in dozens of drills. The darkness was familiar now. The fear was familiar. They knew how to manage both. Bauer pulled out his measuring tape. This was the critical moment. He measured the room's width from the exterior window to the interior wall. 12 feet, 4 inches. Then he measured from the window to the front of the bookshelf. 10 feet, 6 inches. The discrepancy was 22 inches. 22 inches represented the bookshelf depth plus the 18-inch hiding place behind it. If Bauer calculated that the bookshelf itself was only 4 inches deep, he would realize 18 inches were missing. 18 missing inches meant a hidden space. Bauer looked at the bookshelf. Visually estimated its depth. The shelves projected approximately 22 inches from the wall. That explained the measurement discrepancy. The bookshelf was deep because it held books, and books require depth. But Bauer was thorough. He walked to the side of the bookshelf where it met the adjacent wall. Examined the joint. The construction appeared original. The wallpaper matched. The wood showed age-appropriate wear. He tested the shelf at the pressure point. Pushed gently. The shelf moved slightly, exactly as a slightly crooked, decades-old shelf would move. The movement suggested poor construction, not a hidden mechanism. Bauer spent 11 minutes examining the bookshelf. He checked every accessible surface. Looked behind books. Tested panels. Measured dimensions. His training told him that bookshelf walls were frequently used for concealment. His experience told him that concealed spaces had tells. Inconsistencies. Things that didn't feel right. This bookshelf felt right. Old. Imperfect. Ordinary. The kind of furniture that existed in 10,000 Dutch homes. The kind of thing that nobody would deliberately build if they were trying to hide something. If you were building a hiding place, you would build something new, something perfect, something that looked intentional. This looked like furniture that had accumulated naturally across decades. It looked exactly like what it claimed to be. At 12 o'clock, Bauer left the room. Moved to the attic. The search continued for another 20 minutes. At 12:20, the SD team departed. They had found nothing suspicious. Corrie waited the protocol 15 minutes. Then she released the hiding place mechanism. The two people emerged. The husband was composed. The wife was shaking. He was so close, she whispered. I could hear him breathing. I thought he would hear us breathing. Corrie explained what Bauer had done wrong. He had looked for evidence of deception. But the bookshelf showed evidence of authenticity. Age. Wear. Imperfection. The human brain is trained to recognize deception by looking for things that seem wrong. But when everything seems right, the brain concludes there is no deception. The psychology was simple. People see what they expect to see. Bauer expected hidden spaces to have tells. The bookshelf had no tells because the tells had been deliberately removed and replaced with anti-tells. Evidence of normalcy. Evidence of age. Evidence of ordinary history. An SD officer had spent 11 minutes examining the exact location where people were hiding and concluded there was nothing there. Not because the hiding was perfect. But because the imperfection was perfect. This was the secret trick. Not architectural genius. Not advanced engineering. Just the understanding that human perception is shaped by expectation. And if you can control expectation, you can control what people see. Over the following months, this principle was refined. The resistance network in Haarlem created 37 additional hiding places using the same psychological methodology. Visible imperfection. Authentic age. Ordinary appearance. Spaces that existed in plain sight because they looked too normal to be hiding anything. The Germans searched these locations repeatedly. They found 7 of the 37 hiding places. 30 remained undiscovered. The ones discovered had tells. Small construction errors. Miscalibrated dust. Wood that was slightly too new. The ones that survived had perfect imperfection. But there was a cost. The psychological trick required that people live with visible concealment that appeared normal. That meant the hiding places looked ordinary even to the people using them. And ordinary things can be forgotten. On February 28, 1944, that forgetting would have consequences. February 28, 1944. 11 o'clock hours. The betrayal came from someone named Jan Vogel. A Dutch collaborator working for the Gestapo. His method was simple. He infiltrated the resistance network by pretending to be a Jewish man seeking help. The network trusted him. Helped him. Revealed their safe houses and their methods. Vogel documented everything. Created detailed files on 37 resistance locations in Haarlem. The beach was number 4 on his list. On February 28, Vogel provided his complete intelligence to the Gestapo. 6 SD officers were assigned to raid the identified addresses. The beach raid was scheduled for noon. At 11:30, the alarm system activated. But the alarm was late. Normally, underground lookouts reported German movements 15 to 20 minutes before raids arrived. This time, the warning came 6 minutes before SD officers surrounded the beach. 6 minutes. Not enough time. Corrie had 6 people in residence. 5 could move quickly. 1 could not. An elderly Jewish woman named Mrs. Kick. 73 years old. Severe arthritis. She could barely walk even with assistance. The mathematics were impossible. Mrs. Kick needed 5 minutes to climb from the first floor to the third floor. The alarm provided 6 minutes. 1 minute to reach the hiding place was not survivable. Corrie made a decision. Leave Mrs. Kick in her first floor room. Hide the other 5. Claim Mrs. Kick was a family member if Germans found her. It was a lie that might work if Mrs. Kick could maintain the deception. The other 5 ran to the third floor. Entered the hiding place in 28 seconds. The bookshelf closed. They vanished into darkness. At 11:36, German soldiers smashed through the front door. They did not knock. Smashing doors meant this was not a routine search. This was a targeted raid based on specific intelligence. The SD team leader was Obersturmführer Fritz Kranz. His record showed 43 successful arrests of resistance members and hidden Jews. He came prepared with specific information. Someone in this house was hiding people. Someone in this house would be arrested. Kranz found Mrs. Kick immediately. First floor bedroom. Elderly woman. Clearly not Dutch. Her appearance, her accent, her fear, everything identified her as Jewish. Papers, Kranz demanded. Mrs. Kick had no papers. Her identification card had been confiscated in 1942 when Jews were required to register with occupation authorities. She had been hiding for 18 months with no documentation. Kranz arrested her on site. Arrested Corrie for harboring her. Arrested Betsy. Arrested Casper. The entire family was detained. But Kranz had specific intelligence about more people. His informant had indicated the Beej was hiding multiple Jews. One elderly woman was insufficient. There had to be more. The search began. Systematic. Professional. For SD officers moving through every floor. They started in the basement. Checked the coal cellar. Examined the foundation. Found nothing. Ground floor. The watch shop. Living quarters. Storage rooms. Every space examined. Every piece of furniture moved. Nothing. First floor. Bedrooms. Kitchen. Bathroom. Nothing. Second floor. Storage. Betsy's room. Guest quarters. Nothing. Third floor. Corrie's bedroom. At 12:02, Obersturmführer Kranz entered the room where 5 people stood in complete darkness 22 inches behind a bookshelf wall. Kranz had been briefed about bookshelf concealment. He knew the methodology. He examined the walls systematically. He pulled books from shelves. Checked for false backs. The books were real. He measured the room dimensions. Calculated the bookshelf depth. The mathematics appeared correct. He knocked on the shelves listening for hollow sounds. The wood sounded solid. But Kranz had better intelligence than previous searchers. His informant had specifically mentioned a hiding place in Corrie ten Boom's bedroom. Not might have. Not possibly. Definitely had. The hiding place existed. Kranz just needed to find it. He examined the bookshelf more carefully. Checked the sides where the shelving met adjacent walls. The joints appeared original. The wallpaper matched. But something felt wrong. The room felt narrow. Cramped. Not quite right. Kranz checked his notes. The informant's file indicated the hiding place was accessed through a moving bookshelf section. That information was specific. Precise. It came from someone who knew. He tested every shelf. Pushed. Pulled. Twisted. Nothing moved except the shelves that were slightly crooked, and those moved in ways consistent with poor construction, not hidden mechanisms. Behind the bookshelf, 5 people maintained absolute silence. They could hear everything. Hear books being removed. Hear Kranz testing the wood. Hear his frustration building. They knew the informant had provided specific intelligence. They knew Kranz would not stop searching. One of the 5 was a young man named David Levinson. 22 years old. He had been hiding at the beach for 6 days. David had claustrophobia. The darkness triggered severe panic responses. During practice drills, he had never lasted more than 90 minutes before needing to emerge. This was not a drill. This was survival. David felt the familiar panic building. The darkness was crushing him. His chest felt tight. He wanted to scream. Wanted to run. Wanted out. But he had learned techniques. Mental displacement. Controlled breathing. He visualized his mother's kitchen in Amsterdam. Saw every detail. The blue tiles. The copper pots. The afternoon light through windows. He went to that kitchen in his mind. Stood there. Breathed there. Let the darkness exist around him while living somewhere else internally. Krantz continued searching. 12 minutes. 15. 20. His thoroughness was exceptional. He removed every accessible book from the shelves. Checked every panel. Tested every surface. At 12:27, he discovered something. A small discrepancy in the wallpaper pattern where the bookshelf met the adjacent wall. The pattern didn't align perfectly. It was a minor flaw. The kind that could be construction error. But it could also indicate recent modification. Krantz examined the misalignment closely. Used his fingernail to test the wallpaper edge. It was sealed properly. Aged appropriately. Not recent work. But the misalignment suggested the bookshelf might have been moved at some point. And if it had been moved once, it might move again. He pushed on the bookshelf at the misalignment point. Nothing. Pushed harder. Nothing. The bookshelf was solid. Immovable. The hiding place entrance was not at the misalignment. The entrance was 8 feet away. The specific shelf at shoulder height, 5 books from the left edge. But Krantz was searching near the wallpaper discrepancy, not the actual entrance point. At 12:35, Krantz gave up on the bookshelf. His training and his informant's intelligence told him the hiding place existed. But he could not find it. The bookshelf appeared to be exactly what it seemed. Old furniture. Ordinary books. Nothing hidden. He left Corrie's bedroom. Continued to the attic. Searched there for 18 minutes. Found nothing. The entire search lasted 73 minutes. Long enough that the 5 people in the hiding place were approaching psychological collapse. David Levinson was on the edge of panic. His visualization technique was failing. The darkness was winning. He wanted to scream. Wanted to reveal himself. Wanted anything except more darkness. But he remained silent. Because the others remained silent. Because breaking now meant everyone died. Because he had learned that survival meant enduring what felt unendurable. At 13:15, the SD team departed. They took Corrie, Betsy, Casper, and Mrs. Kick as prisoners. The 4 were transported to Scheveningen prison. They would be interrogated. Charged. Eventually sent to concentration camps. But the hiding place was not discovered. 5 people remained standing in darkness. They could hear the Germans leaving. Could hear vehicles departing. Could hear silence return. They waited. Protocol required 30 minutes after Germans departed before emerging. To ensure the departure was genuine. Not a trap. At 13:45, someone activated the release mechanism from outside. A resistance worker who had been watching the building. The bookshelf slid aside. 5 people emerged into light. David Levinson collapsed immediately. Sobbing. Shaking. He had been in the darkness for 2 hours and 9 minutes. The longest duration of his life. He would never recover psychologically from those 129 minutes. The darkness would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he had survived. All 5 had survived. While an SD officer specifically informed that a hiding place existed in that exact room had spent 27 minutes searching and found nothing. The hiding place worked. Even when searchers knew it existed. Even when they searched with specific intelligence. Even when they examined the exact wall where people were hiding. It worked because the psychological trick was more powerful than architectural secrets. Because human perception is shaped by expectation. Because search teams looked for evidence of deception and found evidence of authenticity. Because the bookshelf appeared so completely ordinary that minds dismissed it as impossible to be hiding anything. The cost was severe. 4 arrests. 4 people sent to camps. Casper ten Boom would die in prison 10 days later. Corrie and Betsy would survive concentration camps, but Betsy would die at Ravensbrück in December 1944. Only Corrie would survive to tell the story. But the hiding place itself was never discovered. Not that day. Not in subsequent searches. Not ever. German soldiers would search the beach 4 more times in March 1944. They would measure. They would knock on walls. They would examine the bookshelf. They would find nothing. Because nothing appeared to be there. Because the secret trick was not making things invisible. The secret trick was making things appear so utterly normal that invisibility became irrelevant. March 1944 through December 1944. After the February 28 arrests, the beach hiding place remained operational under different management. The resistance network assigned a new family to occupy the house. They continued using the 3rd floor hiding place exactly as designed. Between March and December 1944, 37 additional people hid in that space. The Germans searched the building 9 times. The hiding place was never discovered. The success rate was perfect. 100% survival for those who made it to the hiding place in time. 4 people failed to reach the hiding place during alarm responses. They were discovered and arrested. But those failures were timing failures, not architectural failures. The hiding place itself worked every time it was used correctly. The psychological principle spread through the resistance network. Other safe houses in Haarlem adopted similar methodology. Hiding places that appeared too normal to be suspicious. Spaces that existed in plain sight because human perception skipped past them as unremarkable. The technique was documented in underground resistance manuals. Instructions written in code. Passed between network cells through secure channels. The core principle was always the same: control expectation, control perception. A detailed analysis from March 1944 indicated that hiding places using psychological camouflage had a 73% higher survival rate than hiding places using architectural camouflage alone. The difference was statistically significant. The difference saved lives. But the technique required perfect execution. Small errors destroyed the psychology. A bookshelf that was slightly too new. Dust that was slightly too perfect. Wood that was slightly too straight. Any discrepancy that triggered conscious examination rather than automatic dismissal. The architect continued building hiding places until August 1944 when he was arrested by the SD in a separate operation. His arrest was not related to hiding place construction. He was captured during a weapons smuggling operation. The Germans never connected him to the beach or to the 37 other locations he had modified. Under interrogation, the architect revealed nothing. Standard resistance training. Name, rank, occupation. Nothing else. The Germans beat him. Broke his fingers. Destroyed his hands. The hands that had built spaces where people could be invisible. After the war, those hands would never fully recover. But he revealed no locations. No names. No methods. He survived Neuengamme concentration camp. Liberated by British forces in May 1945. Returned to the Netherlands weighing 89 pounds. Spent 3 months in hospital recovery. Never built another hiding place. The war had ended. Hiding places were no longer necessary. But the principle he had developed, psychological camouflage, expectation control, visible normalcy, that principle survived beyond the war. It was studied by intelligence services. Incorporated into counter-surveillance doctrine. Taught in training programs for clandestine operations. The hiding place in the beach was preserved after liberation. The bookshelf remained in Corrie's bedroom. The false wall remained in place. The entire mechanism was kept functional as historical documentation. In 1988, the space was measured precisely. 18 inches deep. 8 feet wide. 7 feet tall. Approximately 100 cubic feet of space. At maximum capacity, it had held 7 people simultaneously. 7 adults standing in complete darkness while search teams examined the room inches away. 100 cubic feet. The physical space required to make human beings invisible. Not much space. But enough. May 1945. Liberation. The Netherlands was free. German occupation forces had surrendered. Concentration camps were opened. Survivors began returning. Some walking. Some carried on stretchers. Some in coffins. Most never returned at all. Corrie ten Boom was liberated from Ravensbrück on December 31, 1944, due to a clerical error. She returned to Haarlem in January 1945. Found the beach still standing. Found the hiding place intact. Found her father and sister dead. She learned that 80 people had hidden in that space during the 16 months between February 1943 and June 1944 when the hiding place was finally abandoned as the war moved toward conclusion. 80 people. 72 had survived. 8 had been arrested when they failed to reach the hiding place in time or were captured elsewhere in the network. 72 out of 80. A 90% survival rate. In a time when the survival rate for hidden Jews in the Netherlands overall was approximately 25%. The difference was architecture combined with psychology. The difference was understanding that human perception is shaped by expectation. The difference was making the hidden space appear so completely ordinary that minds walked past it without recognition. But Corrie struggled with a difficult truth. The hiding place had saved 72 people. But it had also created a false sense of security. People believed that if they could reach the hiding place, they were safe. That belief made them take risks. Those risks sometimes led to arrests before they could reach the hiding place. 4 of the 8 arrests had been people who delayed evacuation to other safe houses because they believed the beach hiding place would protect them if raids came. They delayed. Raids came. They were arrested before reaching the 3rd floor. The hiding place was not safety. It was a tool. Tools could be used well or poorly. The responsibility for using tools correctly belonged to humans, not to the tools themselves. After the war, Corrie began speaking publicly about her experiences. She wrote books. Traveled internationally. Spoke to audiences about forgiveness. About courage. About faith. But she rarely discussed the technical details of the hiding place. When asked how the hiding place worked, she gave a simple answer: it was just a space behind a wall. Nothing special. This answer was technically accurate but deliberately incomplete. She did not explain the psychological principles. Did not describe the expectation control. Did not reveal the secret trick. The reason was operational security. The war was over, but the principle was not obsolete. Other places. Other times. Other people who might need to be invisible. Publishing detailed methodology about psychological camouflage would compromise future applications. She kept the secret until 1971 when she published The Hiding Place, a memoir co-written with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. Even in that book, the technical details were minimal. Readers learned that a hiding place existed. That it was behind a bookshelf. That people stood in darkness during searches. But the specific psychological principles remained undescribed. It was Elizabeth Sherrill who finally convinced Corrie that the full story should be preserved. Not published broadly, but documented for historical archives. In 1973, Corrie spent 2 days describing the complete technical and psychological methodology to researchers at the Dutch Resistance Museum in Amsterdam. The recording of that interview was sealed for 25 years. Made public in 1998. Even then, the most sensitive details were redacted. The exact trigger point for the bookshelf mechanism. The precise dust composition. The specific wallpaper pattern techniques. These remained classified because the principles they represented were still operationally useful. Intelligence agencies had studied the beach hiding place since 1945. The methodology had been adapted for Cold War applications. Safe houses in Eastern Europe. Resistance networks in Soviet-controlled territories. Smuggling operations across the Iron Curtain. The same psychological principles that made search parties walk past hidden Jews in 1943 made border guards walk past hidden refugees in 1961. The principle was universal. Human perception is shaped by expectation. Control expectation, control perception. Make things appear so completely normal that abnormality becomes invisible. But there was a cost to this knowledge. Once you understood how easily humans could be deceived by managing their expectations, you could never trust your own perceptions again. You would always wonder what you were walking past. What you were not seeing because your mind expected normalcy. Corrie experienced this constantly after the war. Walking through buildings, she would automatically analyze walls. Check for inconsistent dimensions. Look for spaces that felt wrong. She could not stop herself. The skill had been trained too deeply. She visited the beach in 1977, 33 years after her arrest. The house had been converted into a museum. The hiding place was open for tours. People could enter the space. Stand where refugees had stood. Experience the darkness. Corrie stood in the hiding place for the first time since February 1944. The space was exactly as she remembered. 18 inches deep. The false wall precisely where it had been built. The bookshelf mechanism still functional. She spent 7 minutes in the darkness. Silent. Still. Remembering the mathematics of survival. 72 people saved. 8 lost. Her father dead. Her sister dead. The cost of resistance calculated in lives and absence. When she emerged, a museum guide asked what she had been thinking about in the darkness. Corrie's answer was simple. I was thinking about the ones who didn't make it. The 8 who were arrested. I was thinking that we saved 72, but we also failed to save 8. And I will always wonder if we could have saved them too if we had been better. Faster. Smarter. The guide asked if she regretted building the hiding place. Regretted the risks that were taken. Corrie shook her head. Regret is the wrong question. The question is whether we did everything we could with what we had. I believe we did. 72 people lived because of that space. That's 72 lives. 72 families. 72 futures that would not have existed without those 18 inches of darkness. She paused. But I also remember the 8 who didn't make it. Because if you only celebrate the successes, you forget the cost. And forgetting the cost makes you careless. Resistance is not glorious. It's mathematics. Cold. Brutal. You save who you can save. You lose who you cannot save. And you live with both. The beach hiding place exists today exactly as it was built in February 1943. The bookshelf mechanism still operates. The false wall remains in position. The ventilation shaft still connects to the adjacent building, though that building has been renovated multiple times. Tourists can visit. Can stand in the space. Can experience the darkness for a few minutes before emerging into light. Most people last less than 5 minutes before wanting out. The darkness is too complete. Too heavy. Too psychologically oppressive. 5 minutes. The people who used this space operationally stood in that darkness for hours. The longest recorded duration was 4 hours and 17 minutes during a search in August 1944. 4 hours and 17 minutes of absolute blackness. Absolute silence. Absolute stillness. 4 people standing invisible while German soldiers methodically searched the room around them. The mathematics of survival were calculated in minutes and inches. 60 seconds to reach the hiding place. 18 inches of depth to stand in. As many hours as necessary to outlast the search. Simple arithmetic that meant life or death. Research conducted in the 1990s analyzed German records of search operations in Haarlem during 1943 to 1944. Of approximately 2,400 documented searches, hidden spaces were discovered in 347 cases. A 14% discovery rate. The beach was searched 17 times and the hiding place was never discovered. 0% discovery rate despite multiple searches by experienced SD officers who specifically suspected concealment. The statistical anomaly suggests that the psychological principle was effective. More effective than architectural sophistication alone. The hiding place was not particularly clever architecturally. It was a false wall with a moving bookshelf entrance. Dozens of similar designs existed in occupied Europe. Many were discovered. What made the beach hiding place different was the psychological engineering. The expectation management. The visible normalcy. The creation of a space that appeared so utterly unremarkable that trained searchers walked past it repeatedly without recognition. This principle, that invisibility is not about hiding but about being so completely normal that minds do not register abnormality, has applications far beyond World War II resistance networks. Modern security systems use the same psychology. Camouflage for military installations. Counter-surveillance for intelligence operations. Social engineering for security penetration testing. The principle is taught in intelligence training programs worldwide. Not always with attribution to the beach. Often presented as original research. But the core concept traces back to the architect's insight in February 1943, control expectation, control perception. The cost of implementing this principle correctly was exceptional human discipline. People had to remain absolutely silent in absolute darkness for extended periods. They had to control panic. Control breath. Control the instinctive human responses to sensory deprivation. This discipline had to be trained. Practiced. Refined through repeated drills until it became automatic. The resistance network in Haarlem conducted an estimated 843 practice drills between March 1943 and June 1944. 843 times people voluntarily entered the hiding place for training purposes. Each drill lasted 30 to 90 minutes. The accumulated training time was approximately 63,000 minutes. 1,050 hours of people standing in voluntary darkness to prepare for moments when the darkness would not be voluntary. That preparation saved 72 lives. The arithmetic is clear. 1,050 hours of practice resulted in 72 survivors. Each life cost approximately 14 hours of training time. When measured against the alternative, discovery, arrest, deportation, death, 14 hours of darkness was a small price. But the psychological cost was not small. Many of the people who used the hiding place successfully experienced long-term psychological trauma. Claustrophobia. Darkness phobia. Hypervigilance. Post-traumatic stress. The darkness they survived in 1943 and 1944 continued haunting them for decades afterward. David Levinson, who endured 129 minutes in the hiding place during the February 28, 1944 raid, never fully recovered. He required psychiatric treatment for severe anxiety until his death in 1989. He could not tolerate enclosed spaces. Could not sleep in darkness. Required night lights and open doors for the rest of his life. But he lived. Survived the war. Married. Had children. Built a life that would not have existed without those 129 minutes of psychological torture. The cost was high, but the alternative was extinction. The hiding place represents a specific kind of resistance. Not violent. Not heroic in the traditional sense. Just architectural and psychological engineering applied to the problem of human survival. The resistance was in the details. The measurements. The dust composition. The bookshelf imperfection. The expectation management. Every detail mattered. A shelf positioned 1 inch too high would have created visual dissonance. Dust applied too evenly would have suggested recent distribution. Wallpaper matched too perfectly would have indicated recent work. The margin for error was measured in fractions of inches and psychological milliseconds. The time it takes for a human mind to register something unusual and shift from automatic perception to conscious examination. That transition, from automatic to conscious perception, was the battlefield. The architect understood that human minds process most sensory information automatically. Automatically means without conscious thought. The mind sees a bookshelf, categorizes it as ordinary furniture, and moves on. If the mind pauses to examine the bookshelf consciously, the deception can fail. The goal was to make the hiding place so perfectly ordinary that conscious examination never occurred. The mind would see, categorize, and dismiss. See, categorize, dismiss. The entire process taking less than 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds meant survival. The principle works because human evolution optimized for efficiency, not accuracy. The brain cannot consciously process every sensory input. Too much information. Too little processing capacity. So the brain uses shortcuts. Pattern recognition. Expectation matching. When sensory input matches expected patterns, the brain skips detailed analysis. Assumes the pattern is correct and moves on. The hiding place exploited this evolutionary shortcut. Created a pattern that matched expected normalcy so precisely that brains skipped past it automatically. The shortcut that helped early humans process dangerous environments quickly became the vulnerability that let hidden refugees survive in occupied Europe. Today, the beach hiding place is visited by approximately 180,000 people annually. Most visitors spend less than 20 minutes in the building. They see the bookshelf. Learn about Corrie ten Boom. Hear stories of resistance and survival. Then they leave. Few visitors understand the psychological sophistication that made the hiding place work. They see a space behind a wall. They understand it as architectural cleverness. But the real cleverness was not architectural. It was psychological. It was understanding how human perception works and engineering a deception that aligned perfectly with those perceptual mechanisms. The secret trick that made search parties walk past everything was not hiding. It was the opposite of hiding. It was being so completely visible, so utterly ordinary, so perfectly normal that minds processed and dismissed without recognition. The trick was not invisibility. The trick was visible normalcy. And that trick saved 72 lives. 72 people who stood in darkness while searchers looked directly at their location and saw nothing worth examining. 72 people who survived because human perception is shaped by expectation, and expectation can be controlled. The mathematics were simple. 18 inches of space. 100 cubic feet of volume. 72 lives saved. 8 lives lost. 1,050 hours of training. 17 searches conducted. 0 discoveries made. Simple arithmetic that calculated survival from darkness. The hiding place stands today exactly as it was built. Waiting in permanent silence. A memorial to the people who stood there. To the mathematics of resistance. To the cold calculation that survival required human beings to become invisible not through hiding, but through being so completely ordinary that ordinary became invisible. In the end, that was the secret trick. Not architecture. Not engineering. Just the understanding that what you do not notice is often more powerful than what you cannot see. And in that difference between cannot see and do not notice lay the 18 inches that separated life from death for 72 people who learned how to be so perfectly ordinary that search parties walked past everything.